Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's Workshop. So now that Marguerite and Sadi have confirmed that they're going forward with the wedding, I need to get some of Marguerite's things together for her to take on her honeymoon. And traditionally, it's called a trousseau. I'm not sure how much trousseau it will be, but I'm going to put together a few things for her to take. Now, I made this little hat. Now, it's not Marguerite's style, but I do have some additional guests coming to the rooming house for the wedding, so these things can be among their accessories. So there will be a few extras. Now, there were so many ideas going through my mind. I wanted to start out by making some things to actually put into her luggage or trunk, so I thought it would be nice to start things off with a few little folded shirts and blouses for her trunk or suitcase. Now, I started out the process by making this kind of navy blue shirt. This is probably not going to be for Marguerite, but the general process for making tiny folded shirts is the same. So I started out with a little piece of card and I actually wrapped the fabric around it to cover it completely. And after the little piece of card was covered completely with the fabric, I played around with it a little bit to make sure that it wasn't too big for the luggage that I created. Then I cut a really thin piece of the same fabric and added glue to it and folded it down on itself to create a placket, which is the part of the shirt where the buttons will rest down the front. Now again, dolls, I create these little skinnies for so many different things. They're very useful for sleeves or belts or suspenders or waistbands and even straps on dresses. And here you can see I just glued it straight down the front, down the center of the folded piece of fabric. Now, dolls, you can definitely pre-cut these pieces ahead of time. I generally like to do each part as I go along. So I went ahead and made another thin piece, not quite as thin as the one for the placket. I made it a little bit wider because I wanted it to be the collar. And I cut the corners off of each end to make the end of the collar rounded so that it will have a softer collar because I wanted this to be a woman's blouse. And after I did that, I added tacky glue and glued it to the top of the folded little shirt on top of the placket. Now you kind of see here how I'm trying to glue it to the top, and there's a little space because it's not glued all the way down, but I want you to see the general shape, but you can see through the back. So I do need to add a little additional glue to the back side of the shirt so that you won't be able to see where it's actually attached. And I did add a little bit of extra glue under the collar to make sure that it was secure on the front as well. Now I really wanted to create the illusion of puff sleeves for this shirt. And so this is me just cutting the portion for the sleeves. Now dolls, I don't make or have patterns. I just kind of cut shapes out and work with the shapes that would look like if it had a pattern. You may want to create your own patterns when making your doll clothes or even when making the little folded shirts. I just kind of wing everything. I've been making things like this so long, so I just kind of eyeball it. But it would be definitely a good practice to create little templates and make your own patterns. Many times I don't make patterns for my dolls because I make them in so many different shapes and sizes. They always have to have a custom garment. Now I did glue the seams together, but I will show you how I gather it and attach it after it dries. So let me show you something else I was working on. Now, dolls, I've gotten so many wonderful packages of supplies and things for the dolls and for the wedding. And I just happened to be using some of the items that I recently got from my precious doll, Laura Wiles. Now, this is actually the paper that you use to make streamers and things when you're doing parties or events, but it actually reminded me of pleats in a gathered skirt. So here I am, dolls, just playing with this paper and gathering it in a way to make it look like a skirt. So I literally just cut off a small piece of the streamer. And dolls, honestly, at this moment, I'm not really sure what I'm making. I'm just letting myself just play and allow my imagination to flow to see what I can come up with. I know definitely after you've come up with a concept, then you create structure around that. But before you get to that point, you just have to allow yourself to imagine. So among the things in the box that Laura sent me was this beautiful black and pink ribbon. And I kept playing with it, trying to determine what I could create with it. And then I got an idea. So I started out by making some little tiny purses that are like the ones that I made for the dress shop Dollhouse. I will leave a link in the description of how they were created or what the process was, but here is the end result. And dolls, I was so fascinated by that little black and pink ribbon, and I wanted to make Marguerite somewhat of a sewing box. So I used the black and pink ribbon to wrap around this white frame that I had. Well, I was using it as a frame. I'm not sure what it was, but I glued it to the perimeter just like I did the popsicle sticks when I made the burlap bags. I will leave a link in the description for that particular item. Then I trimmed off the excess and allowed it to dry. So while it was drying, I was trying to think of ways of how to close the box for at the bottom and to create a lid. So for the bottom portion, I used a couple shingles and I trimmed off the corners so it would be rounded to actually fit inside the ribbon portion. And after I cut off the corners and shaped it a little bit, I realized that it would fit really nicely. I did take time to sand off those corners to make them smooth. And after I made sure the fit was right, I added glue to the inside edge of the fabric and on top of the little frame that I created to glue in the shingle to be the bottom. So I'm still working in the vein of making more things for Marguerite. Now, although Marguerite doesn't wear hats, she needed to have a few hat pins. It's just one of those things that adult married women have. So I simply glued some of the tiniest beads I had to the tops of the tiniest pins I had to make it look decorative. Now, in addition to hat pins, I did make a few more hangers. Now, dolls, there are lots of ways to make hangers, but I use my 318 thermostat wire. I drill a hole, add an eye hook or eye loop. Now, I've definitely shared this in a previous video, but I'm going to do it really quick just to let you see it again. Now, still using that same 318 thermostat wire, and this time I was using a gold eye hook with the ribbon to completely cover the glue and to make sure that I close the ends so that none of the wire is visible. And now you can embellish it in any way you like to make it uniquely yours. Now, take as much time as you need in detailing your hangers to make them look uniform and intentional, even if it means removing some of the design to the left. Keep everything neat and in scale. Now, while the beads and hangers are drying, I went ahead to stain another piece of shingle that I shaped rounded just like I did the base to create a lid. And while working on that, I found some really interesting little beads that I thought would work well to hold the hat pins. So I added a little dot of glue to the top and began to add a few hat pins to each one. And while that was drying, I went on to glue a few more beads together to create a few more jars and toiletries. Now, dolls, at this point, I got a burst of creativity, and it's really not much to say, but that I just start gluing things together so that Marguerite and the new dolls will have plenty of extras. Now, dolls, I know I originally started out calling this little box Marguerite's sewing box, but I think I want to make it like her toiletry bag that she carries with her on her honeymoon. So I was trying to think of some ways to really add a lot more detail to it. So I went with the same concept of using really thin pieces of leather that I had, and I cut it in strips, just like I did when I was making straps for Sadi's fishing bag that I made with a shingle and some burlap. And I'm actually going to just glue it to the surface of the lid. Now, again, this lid was made with two pieces of shingles that I glued together, and then I cut off the corners and rounded them to make it fit neatly on top of the little fabric box. And in this frame, I'm adding little beads of glue so that I can add the leather straps to attach it to the fabric box. Now, dolls, when you're doing something like this, take your time. Now, you don't have to be neurotic about it, but you do want to make it as neat as possible so that when you're done, you'll have a project that you're truly proud of. Now, I'm just laying it just carefully on top of the glue. Now, after you do the initial placement on the lid, my straps were kind of long, so I wanted to allow that to dry completely before I tried to glue the other straps to the fabric portion of the bag. And even though you see me playing with it a little bit, I'm being careful not to manipulate the straps while they're drying. Now, at this point, I was really glad that I stained the lid before I added the straps because stain won't take on top of glue. Now, here I'm preparing to add the glue to the straps, but I did trim it off to make it match the length of the box, and now I'm just adding a thin bead of glue right along that same line marker that I added the bead of glue to the lid so that everything will look as uniform as possible. Now, dolls, if you want to measure that distance to make sure it's perfect, that's definitely up to you. I didn't measure it. I definitely eyeballed it, but in the end, I thought it looked really nice and the straps looked really neat. Now, if you have to, go on and work on something else to distract yourself so you don't bother it while it's drying, because you don't want to disrupt the drying process, because you don't want to disturb or ruin the work you've already completed. Now, after the main portion of the bag or box is constructed, you can do whatever you want when it comes to buckles, belts, and straps. Now, my daughter had bought me some really, really tiny buckles off of Temu, and I used a little tiny buckle to make what would look like a strap closure in the front of the bag, and then I added a piece of leather to the front to come down to make it look as though that's the way the bag closes. I'm actually not trying to make it functional, dolls. I just want it to be cute. And although my intent wasn't to make it functional, it actually does fit within the buckle loop. And at this point, dolls, the major construction of the bag is complete. I'm actually just playing around, adding additional nail art studs to look as though they're rivets or buckles or things, just to give additional detail and interest to the little bag. There is no right or wrong way to do it. Look at the bags and boxes and different satchels and things you have around your home. Look at Pinterest for inspiration. But have fun with this, dolls. Just break all the rules. Do whatever you like. Whatever pleases your eye is what's correct. I think that's one of the beautiful things about art and creativity, that you can break all the rules and nobody gets hurt. Now in this frame, you can see me adding glue to the sides so that I can add a piece of the really thin leather to create a strap so that the dolls can carry the bag. And again, a word to the wise, you may want to let one strap dry on one side before you handle it or try to strap it to the other side, because the tension may cause it to pull apart. And once both sides of the straps are glued on and they're the length that you want them to be, you can add grommets, buckles, or any other embellishments to complete your little bag, whether you use it as a sewing kit or as a cosmetic bag. So let me go ahead and show you what this little collection looks like completed. And here we are, dolls. I made several little shirts, a couple purses, a hanger, the sewing box / cosmetic bag, a little girl's dress, and several little toiletry items. I'm going to bring the lens in a little bit closer so you can see how everything turned out. And here are my little shirts, the toiletry bottles. There's a closer look at the little bag and the hangers and the two little purses. Oh, and I did make 2 men's shirts just to balance things out. And there's that little dress that was made with the crepe paper. I'm not even sure who I made it for, but it sure did come out cute. Now, dolls, if you've enjoyed this video today, definitely let me know in the comments. And if you want to see more content like this, always look for me on Mondays and Wednesdays after 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And make sure you subscribe. And I'll be looking forward to seeing you on the next episode of Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye now, dolls.